Hello, everyone, and welcome to another author interview here on the channel. I'm your host, Gabriel Garcia, otherwise known as the Wandering Quill and the Wandering Scribe, and today we have a first timer here on the show. My guest is a pastor in Iowa and a fantasy fanatic at heart. My guest grew up reading various fantasy books, including Lord of the Rings. Tolkien's ability to build a world with depth beyond a series of books was astonishing and ignited my guest's passion for traditional quest style fantasy books. His love for Tolkien has drawn him to write his series based on characters from when he played World of Warcraft. He crafted his world with a rich history to support his story and the ability to write other side series later. His passion is to share what he loves with the world and return to the style of fantasy books he grew up reading. His initial goal is to write 3 books in his current series, and he plans to set another 3 books in another period in the world. And to tell us all about that and more, let's give a huge round of applause to today's guest, Mr. Alex Zenk. Alex, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Well, it's an honor to be here, so thank you for having me. Looking forward to this.
Awesome. So before we dive into your series and your background as an author, is there anything else you'd like to share with the viewers and listeners?
I think my little synopsis there did a fine job, and it's funny because I wrote that maybe 3 to 6 weeks ago, and now I've already planned out 3 more books in the world that I want to write. So I'm like up to 9. So they just keep coming. So it's great. I love it.
Awesome. Now, as a little teaser for our viewers and listeners, what can you tell us of the series you are working on?
So the first series is going to take place at the very end point in time in my world. It's a good versus evil story, and it's a clean, high fantasy, if you would, sword and sorcery quest style book. Think of like Lord of the Rings type. When you had to take the ring and take it to Mount Doom and destroy it, and that is not obviously the premise to my story, but that's the whole premise of a quest is where I'm looking at taking this and going on that. It's centered around a main character. His name's Orty, and he's a little dwarf mage, and he's going on this adventure to find relics of a past long forgotten to try and assist the heroes in the story with this encroaching doom and evil that's coming into the land. So
Nice. That actually does very much sound like, a Lord of the Rings type story. And I love the fact you included a dwarf mage because honestly, I don't think I've ever read a character like that in any
yeah,
fantasy book. So that's actually really, really cool. And again, from your bio, you said that Tolkien had a huge impact on your life from like the style of from the worlds he created, the type of stories he told. So from that point to now, would you say that you've always had a passion for writing, or did that come about later in life?
um, when I was in like 8th grade, I took a shot at writing a Star Wars book, and it was very, very dismal. So I think we got maybe 3 chapters, and it was just bad. You're in 8th grade, so what do you expect? But um, I was always good at English, and I always hated English. Like I got A's in every English class. I took advanced college English classes in high school, and then when I went through college, I took all of the English and writing classes that I could. And being a pastor, my entire degree is focused on writing, and it just was one of those things. Like I never really cared to do it, but I enjoyed doing it. And so when I finished my master's, I set out to write a book on theology, which I had published earlier this year. And but in the meantime that I was writing that, I was kind of piddling through this mindset of like, I really want to write a fantasy story, and I've had this idea for a number of years. And so I took my character that I played in World of Warcraft, the name and kind of the persona of him, and I took elements. I can't say I took the whole thing because the next set of books will actually be the full character itself.
Okay.
But I took the name and the dwarf nature of him and made a book about him. So while I was writing this theology book, I was going through and I would kind of piddle through this. And then once I finished the theology book in February, I just went full-fledged into this thing, and I probably wrote 50,000 words between February and August. So I just went full steam ahead into it.
Wow. So would you
Yeah.
say that was your aha moment, that this moment or this period in your life was like, okay, I have this story in my head. I want to share it with the world.
I think that was it. And it was kind of in conjunction with two things. The first is I was working in IT. I passed around the weekends, and Monday through Friday is kind of open. So I was working in IT. So, I wasn't happy with that, and I wanted to do something that I was happy with. And so I left the IT job, and now I'm teaching at a local university and
Mm.
in writing. And so I wanted to really find my niche in writing fantasy. And my biggest, I guess you can call it beef with the marketplace is I go to a bookstore and I pick up a fantasy book now, and I'm uncertain whether this is going to be a sword and sorcery style fantasy novel, or is it going to be a romantasy filled with all of this extra spice and things that I just didn't care to read for. I have a very particular viewpoint in what I like to read. I want to read fantasy novels that deal with wizards and mages and sorcery and dragons, and I want epic battle scenes, and I don't need all the extra stuff. I just wanted straightforward fantasy. So I set out to write this book in reaction to that feeling of going into like a Barnes and Noble and just being shocked at just like, man, I don't know what to pick up anymore, and I have to spend 20 minutes going through Google reading reviews to see if this is a book that's going to fit my niche. So
That's actually very, very good point. And that actually kind of ties in now to actually the first question of the interview, which is the goals that you had when writing the story. And I think you answered it, where it's like writing this story was almost like in response to the fantasy genre, being dominated by romance fantasy. And a lot of authors on the show have said that romance fantasy is like the dominant subgenre, which is read by everyone. It's probably the most read genre out of all the subgenres of fantasy, and which we'll touch on later. But going back to the question, so besides that main goal,
mhm.
did you have other goals in mind when writing this book, in regards to your prospective readers?
So my biggest thing when I looked at this was have like I said, I have a particular like viewpoint of what I want fantasy to be, and there's a lot of great authors out there. There's a lot of great fantasy authors outside of Tolkien that have done a tremendous amount of work in the genre, and a lot of times their work kind of goes under the radar because of all these the hot and famous stuff in the moment, and you miss out on people like Terry Goodwin and all of these other authors who have made their impression over the years. And so um, for me, it was one of those like, I have this just crazy idea, and I thought, boy, it'd be kind of cool to really reminisce my Lord of the Rings and World of Warcraft days, and just really bring a character to life. And so I started playing around with some story concepts and some plot developments, and my brother and I used to play together, and so him and I were talking, and we'd spend a couple hours on the phone just kind of kicking around ideas, and we settled on this one in particular that just, in my opinion, really uh, was the one that I wanted to write about. So I'm I'm glad that we kind of made it to this point now. And for me and for my readers, I want just them to go and be able to pick up a book that is everything that they've been promised. It's got all of the action. It's got, a little bit of intriguingness. It's got a little bit of cunningness. It's got the cliffhangers. It's got a little bit of espionage. It's got a little bit of, everything. And it's got a whole bunch of good and a whole bunch of darkness. And so I want people to just pick up a good fantasy novel and just be happy with reading it. It's not, going to make their heads split like reading a Brandon Sanderson novel and trying to, tap down all of the crazy names and locations and concepts that he's got. It's just a straightforward, here's things, I'll explain it as we go, and here's your world. So
Nice, very, very nice. So, when crafting the story, and I've said this numerous times on the show, viewers and listeners, it's not an easy process. It's long hours, it's months and months of editing, maybe even years to get the first draft, finished. And then, of course, you have the cover artists, editors, formatting the book, and all of that, which takes a lot of time and effort. Now, Alex, before I go any further, just to clarify, is your book currently out for people to buy, or is it still in the editing process?
it is in the editing process at the moment. So it is the draft itself is complete. And I was looking at one of your questions that you had later in the show to probably answer this better, but we're working through that process as of now. So my goal is by at the very perhaps earliest or latest, I don't know what timeline would look like, but summer of next year is when I intend to have this released. So
Okay, okay, thank you for that. So now going on to the next question regarding um, reviews. So I'm just going to tweak this a little bit. So when you began writing this out, and now as you say you're in the editing process, did you tell friends and family the story you were writing? And if so, what was their reaction like? Was it positive, negative, or kind of in the middle?
well, most of my family and of themselves won't read my genres. They'll read my theology stuff, which is fine, but they won't pick up the fantasy stuff. My brother, on the other hand, has read it and loved it. And sometimes I always have to give him a hard time. I'm like, are you saying that you love it because you're my brother, or do you actually legitimately like this novel? So I set out and I have a handful of beta readers that have read it and have enjoyed it, and I've gotten good feedback, and I've been and made adjustments and corrections and things based on that feedback. And then what's funny, and I want to answer a question that you haven't asked, just because it fills this question a little bit better with,
All right.
on the concept of being published, the hybrid, indie, or traditional. I've sent it out to a handful of both indie and or hybrid and traditional publishers, and received a contract offer this morning, actually from a publisher in the UK that they love the premise of my book. They said it's well written and they think it's going to do really well. Another publisher that I'm currently in the process of potentially working with here in the United States, their chief editing officer, I guess is their title, is a New York best time selling author themselves, and loved my work and is really excited to work on a fantasy novel written by a pastor. So, I mean, I've gotten some outside feedback, and so far everybody has said that they've enjoyed it, and it looks like it's potentially going to be a decent book, I hope. So
Awesome. And actually, we'll go more into that into the business portion of being an author.
yep.
So, from the response of your beta readers, would you say that their reviews and their reactions has, or in a sort of way, validated the goals that you had going forward with this story and this series?
Yeah, I think they have, and I think they've given me the feedback I've absolutely needed, because when I first wrote the book, I finished at, I want to say 75,000 words, and I knew I needed more material, and I knew some of the scenes needed more pack, if you would. There's more punch to it, and so as I was getting feedback, I'm going through and rereading scenes and editing and adding content. And one of the feedbacks was, I love the book. I just wish some of the fight scenes or some of the conversations would be a little bit longer, because it kind of feels like they're just rushed. And so I was like, okay, great. So I set out and I enhanced a lot of the material, added a lot of material, and now I'm right at about 90,000 words today. I've got one more section of editing that I'm going to work on this afternoon. But by and large, I'm really happy with where things are. And going through the editing process again, I'll probably either add or change more material. So, but the premise of the book itself has been well received by people outside of me, and Like I love my story. I wrote it, and when I read it back, and I think to myself, I'm like, man, this is a really good story. I love reading this. And I'm like, well, because I wrote it, and so it's nice to get that outside perspective from people who have never read it before and know nothing about what I'm doing. And so far, the feedback's been really good. So
Awesome. And that actually kind of leads into the next question, which is more of a reflective question. And this one I feel is, it's a very important topic to talk about because for us authors, it's a very daunting task to write our own books. It's, as I said, it's not easy. You're putting a lot of time, work, and effort into this project, this passion project. And when we finally reach the point we want to publish it, there is a level of anxiety and hesitancy of whether or not it's going to be well received. Even if we've already had positive feedback from our beta readers or ARC readers, there's still that hesitancy if it's going to be received generally by the audience that we're marketing towards, which will be talked about later in the interview.
mhm.
So for you, Alex, when you began writing, and now, of course, in the editing phase, do you have that sense of anxiety or hesitancy when thinking of the next stage, which is, of course, publishing this book? And if not, what has disciplined you to continue writing the story, sharing the story with others, and just really sticking to the goals you had?
Well, I would say maybe more emphasis on excitement rather than anxiety. There is, I think, a sense of anxiety from any author, especially when you're really putting out your first piece.
Hmm.
So when I did the theology book, I wrote it mainly for my church, and so I wasn't looking for it to be a New York best time seller. It's not a long book; it's about 110 pages. It was 41,000 words, I think, by the time I was completed with it, and it was a project for them. And so when I wrote it, I was not, looking to make this huge impact. But with this one, this piece of work for me has been something I put a lot of thought and process into, and and I think it is, it makes me excited, but also a little bit anxious because I want the world to see this and see how my brain thinks, um and I'm excited to see what people have to say, even the negative reviews. I'm not opposed to being told it's garbage, so I want people to to kind of lay it on thick. And maybe it's not for everybody. That's totally fine. But I think there is a piece for any author when they produce work. um is this going to be well received? Or especially if you're writing like a series, is this series going to work well? Are people going to like it? And and what can you keep pouring into it to make people attracted, if you would, to that series?
Definitely. And before we go further into that, we're now going to go into the business portion of the interview, the business side of being an author. Now, you already answered the first question, which is, hybrid, indie, or traditional publishing. But I want to go a little bit further than that. So before you got the uh, responses from these two different publishers, in the beginning, did you want to go traditional or did you want to go indie because you would have more control and ownership of your story?
Well, that's a tough question because I think for any author, having the full control is what I would hope is what they want. And
Mhm.
so I've done a lot of research, and I read tons of blogs and articles and all of these different sites. I've gone through probably 50, 60, 70, 100 different publishers, reading their proposals and what they can do for you and yada, yada, yada. And so what I've kind of found is two things in my little quest here is a lot of people on social media hate what we call vanity publishing, right? So if you
Yes.
go to a website and they're like, we'll publish your book, and then you have to pay them $10,000 to publish your book, and they don't really do any editing or any, illustrations. They want you to kind of have all the work done for it, but they will publish your book and put it out to the internet. And so a lot of people I see hate that style of publishing, and rightly so, because I think it robs the author of the ability to market their book and to work with a team dedicated to managing and producing the content needed for the world. So, when you look at like a hybrid publisher, I think some people might conflate them sometimes to being those vanity publishers, because you have to pay money up front. While when you're looking at a hybrid publisher, you're offloading all of these self work that you would do as an indie publisher. So
Mm.
if I'm indie publishing, I have to find an editor, and I have to find somebody who's going to edit me multiple times. So they're going to do one run through. They're going to give me my book back. I'm going to review the edits, and then we're going to, do line edits and, section edits. And then, they're going to look at and make sure the themes carry across, make sure the times and dates are lining up correctly, make sure the character usage is proper. Like we have a ton of editing work that goes into fantasy novels, and I would have to pay somebody a really nice chunk of money to do this with me. So that's one thing with an indie publisher. Another thing is I would have to go out and have an illustrator. And with my particular book, I would love to have, my maps brought in. I want a cover design that's going to capture people's attention. I need chapter
Mm-hmm.
headings and, and anything else that I decide to add, whether it's character art or, other little pieces throughout the book. So I have to pay somebody to do that work. And then I have to get my ISBN number. I have to get my copyright licensing. I have to make sure that I pay somebody to format the book, or I spend the time on Amazon formatting it to fit their KDP structures and make sure it's ready
Right.
for ebooks or print books and things like that. If I want to print the books and I want to offer them to people, then I have to find a printer, and I have to pay the printer to now print the books and then ship them to me. And then I have to pay somebody to ship them out for me, whether it's UPS or the postal service, but that would incur with, if somebody buys my book, I would have to charge them shipping, right? So now that cost goes up higher. So
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of things with indie publishing that is an advantage because I own the full rights, right? It's
Right.
copyrighted to me. I have full 100% rights. I make full commission on every book sale, but I have to put a lot of money up front in order to get those services.
Yes, and I actually think you touched on a lot of stuff that we haven't touched on the show. Like, if you want to have the books yourself and actually distribute them yourselves, you have to find a print shop that's actually going to do that. And of course, shipping them directly to you, or when you get the books, shipping them out to your readers. And if they want it signed and other stuff like that, that is a lot of stuff too. So, yes, independent publishing, you do have more control, but it is all on you.
Yep.
The finances are all on you. And it's a little intimidating to balance it all. Whereas with hybrid publishing, and I'm glad you brought up, how people kind of, mix hybrid publishing with vanity publishing, because there are possible some aspects where some publishers are hybrid, but they may also be vanity. But then you have truly legitimate hybrid publishers that are genuine and honest in their services.
Yep.
And then, of course, you have, of course, traditional publishing, but that has its own set of challenges, where a lot of authors I've had on the show have said that that's a little bit more intimidating, in the sense that you have, the gatekeepers of
Yep.
traditional publishing for the specific genres and all that. But ultimately, whatever decision you make as an author, you have to really consider which one's going to be the best for me and what's going to be the best for my book and the others that I write about, because we all want to share our book with our audience. And speaking of audience, we now turn to the next question, which is about simply that, because the
Mm-hmm.
audience is very important. Now, we as the authors, we are the first target audience because we know this book better than anyone. We know it inside out. We know what's going to happen. We know who's going to die, who's going to live, and all of that stuff. But for the audience, we really have to take consideration, okay, who are we really writing this for? And in the case of your book, Alex, it seems to me that you're writing for, fans of the classic, high fantasy type stories, Lord of the Rings and stuff like that. So this is a two-part question. The first part is, how important is it, in your opinion, for the author to really consider the audience? And I asked this question because, going back again, we know the story better than anyone else. And I've had some authors say that they didn't consider an audience in mind. They just wrote the book in the sense that this is something that I wish I had when I was growing up.
Yeah.
And the second part of that question is, do you have a good understanding of your audience at this point right now where the book is?
So when I was in high school, it was the first time I came in contact with Lord of the Rings, and so I read The Hobbit and read The Lord of the Rings. And when I was in high school, The Fellowship of the Ring came out into theaters, and I remember sitting there and watching The Fellowship for the first time on a big screen, and just being mesmerized by the cinematography and the work that was put into the movie. And so as I'm watching this, I'm just like I'm living the book out, and I can finally just put all of these images into a picture. And so as I read the book, I can picture, and I walk alongside like what is the movie? Obviously, there's a lot of things that the movies didn't have that the books have, but by and large, I can tell you, like, now I have an idea what Frodo looks like and what Sam looks like and what Gandalf would look like. Obviously, we're using our own depictions to build
Right.
out a fantasy book, but it is helpful, I think, for readers to have that. So when I write, I use this kind of mindset. I'm like, how would I see this scene on a movie theater? And
Mm.
so I write that with such description and depth that I can sit back in my mind and think about what would it be like for a 15 or 18-year-old kid who's reading, Lord of the Rings or reading my book, and then to go and watch this in theaters. Like, how much would this scene just blow their minds? Like, how deep can I make this? How magical or how immersive can I make this? Now, obviously, when going into a movie production, you've got a lot of different things to consider, and sometimes creative abilities are going to exceed in the movie side
Right.
to make it more immersive. But by and large, I write from that perspective. Right now I'm working on book 2, and I'll give you guys a little bit of an insight to my brain here. I'm writing it from a particular scene that is in the underworld, and so it's basically like hell within my fantasy
Ooh.
world. And so, how do I describe this scene that people can be like, that place is messed up? It's like this is dark and really evil. And so you have to create that scene and make it, in my view, into a movie. Like, how would I read this and then see it on the big screen? And so that's my biggest thing. So my audience, when I write them, I'm writing it so that they can feel this scene in their mind. Like, they can really vividly be there with the characters as the characters are going through this process of living out my story. And so, I've been asked, is it a particular age group or a type of reader? I just want people who love fantasy to read the story. It doesn't matter, 12 years old, 18 years old, 80 years old. If you love fantasy, my goal is for you to read my book and to enjoy it. So when I look at that, that's my biggest piece. And so when I write it, especially now as I'm going back through and rewriting it, I'm really making sure the scenes are deep and clean cut, and able for people to just pick up and read. And obviously you would have to read books 1, 2, and 3 in proper order, but when I'm fully done with all of the books, it won't really matter what order you read them in. They'll all have their own like separate series, if you would, but they'll be built inside this bigger world. So I haven't really,
Mm.
I'm not going to make them chained to where you have to go all the way back to the very, very beginning of time to read them. But that would provide you some really cool insights to what I have in the latter books. But they'll be separate series within a grander storyline, if you would. So,
Okay. And as a follow-up to that, would you say that your series is almost like an introduction into the high fantasy genre? And I asked this, bring this up because, an author I had on the show, she wrote a book called Riff Rider, and also another author who wrote Dreamscape, which is where almost think of like a tame version of like the Freddy Krueger kind of character and his powers, where he's able to go into dreams. It's not as graphic as Freddy Krueger or Nightmare on Elm Street, but the premise is that this person can go into their dreams and actually experience, the happiness, but also the nightmares. And same with Rift Rider, where it's like this introduction to this other world where it looks like the regular world, except it's magical. But they're both introductions into their respective subgenres. Would you uh, agree that your series is almost in a way an introduction to the high fantasy genre, if it's for, let's say, someone who's never read any high fantasy stories?
Yeah. And I would certainly say that, I don't write it from like an elementary perspective. Like, I've read some people's works and trying to, provide background and feedback to them. And I just, it's hard to read because the grammar structures are so, they're just really basic. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm not trying to break anybody down, but there's definitely, you know, styles of writing for each age group. And there, but I wouldn't say my book's really young author in terms
Right.
of like writing it for a high school audience. But my book really has a simple method to read it. It's not like I'm
Mm.
writing with, this overtly complex magic system that you're going to have a notepad and detailed note systems throughout my book to be able to connect the dots. It's clean cut. Here it is. Moving on. It's like how Tolkien wrote. Nobody knows how powerful Gandalf really was. We just knew he was
Right.
powerful. We just knew that there was stuff there, and occasionally he would demonstrate stuff for us. But we never really got a feel, and honestly, we never really got a feel for how powerful anything was in that world. It was just there. The magic system was just never really explained, and so my goal is to have a easy to read introduction, but it's also, written in my opinion to a level that people would feel comfortable reading it at a relatively good pace, and in that it's not going to be like corny
Mm.
or cheap, but it's that here's a great series. It's easy to read, and it really provides this sort of, perhaps introduction into the genre, or it provides you, the means by which, if you like Lord of the Rings, you'll like this. If you like this, you'll like Lord of the Rings. If you like this, you'll like the Chronicles of Narnia, and vice versa.
Right.
It's like, and this would be a great book to read before you read Brandon Sanderson, or if you need your
Mm.
brain to cool off after reading Sanderson, you come and read this book. So I feel like it's just, in my opinion, I've written it to an extent that any age group can pick it up, but it's not designed to be like a young audience or young adult fantasy or anything like that. It's just straight out sword sorcery. Here we go. Right.
All right, nice. And the next business question, before I go into another reflective question, is sort of one that it's probably my new favorite question, which is, trying to balance, the individuality of every author. And I bring this up because one of my guests made a really great point is that we have seen in bookstores this tagline on certain books, which is like the next J.K. Rowling, the next Tolkien, the next so and so. From a reader's perspective, that intrigues us because we want to know what's inside. But from an author's perspective, that may be detrimental to them because we're not trying to be like the great titans of the genre or of the past. We're just trying to be our own author. Like, I have a friend who writes very similar in the same style and prose to Tolkien, but she herself will never say that she is the next Tolkien. But she is a great lover of his work. She grew up reading all of his stories. She has a magic system in her own language, which is a callback to Tolkien and the language that he created for his series. But going back again, she does not view herself as the next Tolkien. And it's sort of like that balancing act where you want to show respect to the stories that inspired us authors, but also showing our individuality in our own prose, in our own writings. So for you, Alex, how did you balance that showing, your respect to these stories that you grew up with, the inspirations to the world, but also not taking from those specific stories and planting them into your own story and just changing the name to say, oh, this is my world now?
Yeah. Um, So I definitely love paying tribute to Tolkien, and I think his work, like I said, is what has really inspired me. And hopefully there's no copyright infringements by using a particular name. But I have to say, in my book, I did do a throwback. So if you read it, one of the ponies in my story is named Bill. So I just thought that was funny, and it just worked really well. But other than that, it's the nods, right, to the authors who were just phenomenal and really brought us to, in my opinion, where we are in the literature world today. And so I would hope people don't look at me as the next anything, because
Right.
you can't replace Sanderson, Tolkien, or
Mm,
Rowling, or Robin Hobb, or any of these people, or C.S. Lewis and those guys. You can't do it. You have to make your own path. And
right.
I like if you like this, then you will like that. That I feel
Mm,
like is a better comparison. Because I feel like if you say, to a young upcoming author, hey, here's the next, you know, uh, whoever, you're isolating that author into a box. And now you're
right.
saying, well, this guy should only write X, Y, and Z, or this lady should only write X, Y, and Z. And I think that really hurts if we have the imagination to write other works. Maybe I want to write a spy espionage book within my world, right? So I can't just be uh writing about Tolkien, in the style of Tolkien. What if I want to bring in some Tom Clancy and
Right.
bring that into my world, which I kind of do in one of my series. So it really puts a trapment on an author. And so I think bookstores have to be careful with how they promote upcoming authors, and be like, if you loved this series here, then you will certainly like this series because there's a lot of similarities to it. So it's
Definitely.
hard to be in that bucket to say I'm the next, because I'm just me. I'm just writing as me. So
Definitely. And that kind of segues perfectly into the next reflective question, which is probably another one of my favorite questions. So I'm going to lay some context for this one. So doing podcasting now on my show now for 2 years and meeting a wide range of authors who specialize in different genres, different types of stories. I've come to realize, at least in my opinion, that there are like two paths of the author: to be an author and to be known as an author, which are two very different things. To be an author is an individual dedicated to the art of storytelling, not solely motivated by capital or money. To be known as an author is an individual dedicated to the art of marketing and promotion, going on shows, promoting their work, and really trying to get their name out there on the big stage. Now, each path has its own hurdles, trials, and everything. But I definitely feel for first time authors really want to get their foot in for writing, the second path is the most enticing: to be known as an author, especially when in bookstores you have like the hot new trends, what's really clicking in the industry, and you're trying to write a story that's going to be attached to that latest trend. And one of my friends who works in the publishing industry, she's an independent publisher of her own company, said, if you're doing that as a first time writer, you're not going to do well because you have to think ahead. What's going to be the next trend down the road? And ultimately, as she said, if you go down that path specifically, your writing's not going to be the best that it can be because you're just writing for the trends. And another author gave me another piece of advice, which is very, very true. And that was this: that in this industry, the publishing industry, for first time authors, there's no guarantee that your debut novel is going to guarantee your start or your legacy as an author. There are exceptions to the rule. There are authors whose first book did give them or land them award winning status, which that is not easy to do. So credit where credit is due to those authors who reach that with their first book. But generally speaking, for first time authors, you have rise, fall, and almost like this roller coaster of going up and down. And that can be, detrimental to some authors, and their passion for writing goes down because they weren't really truly writing for themselves. They were just writing for profit. So,
mhm.
Alex, I was wondering if you could add your perspective on this discussion. in the publishing world, it is true that there is no guarantee your first book is going to be the start of your legacy as an author, but it should not deter you from writing stories if you're truly passionate about being
Yeah.
an author, being a storyteller.
Yeah, I think there's two different types of people in those categories. And I think the authors who legitimately love their work will continuously produce work. And you can see that in Tolkien. He only had four major published books in his life. He had other smaller stuff published, but he had The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. And with that, I mean, you can go and look at his world of that he's created in all of his works that Christopher went through and put together for us to have in
Mm-hmm.
printed today. And so the works that Tolkien did, in my view, probably show us the passion that he had for this world. Now, he may not have had a passion to write other literature structures or, anything else. I mean, he's got some other short tales and things like that he worked on, but, by and far his love was Middle Earth. And you see
Mm-hmm.
that when he wrote a love story to his wife using characters in his world. And
Yes.
I mean, that just blows my mind. And then you see somebody like Brandon Sanderson who writes 5 or 6 books a year. I mean, he runs Kickstarters and he's like, oh, I've got a new book coming out. And then I've got 8 secret projects that I'm running with it too. And it's like, how do you write so much a day? And I think his passion is certainly there. Yeah, I mean, he makes lots of money doing it, but is it the money that's the motivator, or is it the fans and the worlds that he creates? I mean, you look at him and I think you can see that there's passion there. And maybe, and this is maybe my bias here, but then you swing over to somebody like George Martin and you read the Game of Thrones, which I've only kind of skimmed through them and never really actually read it, and I couldn't get into the show, but he's never finished the series. It's been 13 years. And you're like, well, why? Did you make enough money? And you're just like, all right, I'm done. And I'm like, if there's passion to finish the story, then finish the story. Why is this so difficult? And so I think between the two mindsets, is there a group that can blend the both path? And I think there is. I think, you write because you want to make money, but it's
Mm-hmm.
not a path that you come out of high school going, I'm going to become an author and make $100,000 a year writing books. It's not going to
No.
happen. You're going to be lucky if you're going to make 10,000 a year or 15,000 a year, and if you're a really good author and you produce enough content that in 20 years you might be making 100 grand a year, but you've got to be producing 20 books in those 20 years or more. You have to write, a huge amount of work to get the market moving and to get your name out there. And so
Yes.
I think that there's a good mix of, mostly people who are passionate that aren't in it for the money per se. Obviously, we would love to see a return for our investment because we pour a lot of time in here. Now,
Right.
I can't tell you how many hours I've written on the Chronicles of Hordy. I mean, I've probably put in, during the summer, I was down here Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and I would spend 5, 6, 8 hours every day for 4 months just this summer. And now I'm teaching at college, and so I'm down here 3 days a week in writing, and then in the evenings I'm trying to write and watch my kids, and then I'm kicking around ideas on the weekends, and sometimes I might grab the laptop and start typing on the laptop. So I write because I love it, and I write because I want this book to impact people in the genre, and maybe down the road when I'm long and gone, it will be a work that people collect in their libraries, and it might inspire other people to pick up and write. I mean, that's what Tolkien did to me. I mean, I'll never meet him, and yet his work inspired probably countless people to pick up the pen and start writing. Same with like C.S. Lewis. So
Mm-hmm.
those authors make an impact far more than just a financial gain. They change lives, and they make an impact to the world, and that is why I write. I write because I want people to enjoy and to find an escape from all the chaos in this world, and to find just some joy in reading a novel. So, for myself, it's definitely a writing of passion. And I like I said, I teach at a college. I preach on the weekends, and it's not that I'm doing this for money. I'm doing this to put my work out there and people to love it. And if I make some money along the way, then great. So it's a perk for me.
100% agree, and that's almost the same mindset I had with an author that really inspired me growing up, which was Brian Jacques for the Redwall series. I read all of his books, and I actually got the last four that he did before he passed away, and that man had a huge impact on me, just as Tolkien was for you. And I 100% agree that these men inspired others to pick up the pen to really show that there is a possibility to create new worlds, to share the message through their stories, and ultimately they will never be forgotten. They have this sense of immortality, which is incredible, and we learned from these authors. In fact, almost every author that I've had on the show has said, C.S. Lewis, Tolkien, Martin for some people, Sanderson, and many, many more have been like their inspirations going forward, and have really learned from them and have tried to see, okay, well, what have they done to help me that can work with my style. And that kind of leads into the next two questions before the final question. Sorry. So the first question is a little bit fun one, as I said. So for you, Alex, um, being now writing the story and being an author, are there any people that you've met on social media, fellow indie authors or other authors in general and writers who you've interacted with who have really helped you, understand, the business of being an author a little bit better, who have given you some points of how to approach a series, how to market your book down the road, or any other author tips?
Um, unfortunately, I would say I'm only really in the infancy of a lot of that process now. And my social media for years and years was dedicated to just Christian content. And then only within about the last probably 6 weeks have I kind of changed directions of it, and made it more so a hobby and an interest page for myself. And that's, I think some people have been kind of off put by that, but it's just like, I've been doing a lot of this other content and it's great, but my religious stuff is focused towards my church that I pastor. They don't get on social media. They're not looking at the content there. So my social media stuff, I want to be me. It's me doing the work. I want
Right.
people to see the work that I put into it. And I've started meeting and talking with some indie authors and um in getting a feel for the process that they've gone into, and I commend them for the work. I mean, I don't have the time to work through finding good editors and illustrators and printing and then having to pre-ship all my books and all that kind of stuff. I just don't have that luxury, and that's why the hybrid printing is my probably go-to. But I've noticed, not from the people I've met, but I've noticed from other groups, that if you aren't an indie author, you're almost looked down upon in like Book Talk or some of these other like elite, if you would, groups on social media. And I think that's kind of an unfortunate piece, because we put in just as much work as an indie author. Now, yeah,
Mm,
they have to do the stuff themselves, but I'm still a part of my editing process. I'm just as much as paying somebody to edit, the company edits and then they send it to me, and then I have to look at revisions and I have to take in consideration, do I like this edit or does this not fit for me? And so then I have to go out and spend the time reading and revising and doing the edits and corrections. And so it's still work on my end, but it just kind of has a weird, negative connotation with it. And unfortunately, because I think we talked about it early in the show, that the hybrids sometimes are often looked at as vanity publishers, and that's not the case in all the situations. So with that being said, I've met a lot of great people, and I've started making some great relationships with people. And I think that is fantastic. And we've talked about, marketing and crowdfunding and, getting the books that we are passionate about into the hands of people. And,
mm,
so my goal on my social media page, and people who watch this, feel free to DM me, because I'll promote you and share your content. I love helping other people, even if there's not, I don't care if there's nothing in it for me. I love helping other people. So I'll share your content. I'll comment on your posts. I'll, do whatever it takes to get people to recognize content, as long as it's good content. If you're writing good material, I'll buy, I'll break every wall I can to get your name out there. And And I think that's just something that the community is really good at is that interconnection, the sharing and helping of each other. So, it's a good community. And then, like I said, I'm just kind of starting to get into it a little bit more. And, um, and it's, but there is a very vile hatred for vanity publishers. And it's really kind of funny to see that. But, you know, I'm very comfortable with one of the publishers that I've been talking with, and I think that they will be a great fit for me uh, in terms of full packages and everything that I'll be able to get a part of. So a lot of exciting things to hopefully come to a close by the end of the year for me.
Awesome. Well, I can't wait to see the book when it's released next year, or even like the process of, it's now going to be out, pre-order is out, and stuff like that. So I can't wait for that, Alex. And actually, now because we're almost near the end, we're actually going to go to the final question, and I think you've probably already answered it, but maybe you can add more stuff to it, which is this. So, with everything you've learned and still learning, and now in this process of editing your book, what is your word of wisdom to fellow authors and writers listening or watching this video right now?
The only thing I can tell you is just keep writing. Just write. Set yourself a schedule, even if it's 2 hours a day. If it's 2 hours a day, 2 hours in the morning, get up early before everybody else in your house does. Go downstairs, go wherever, sit down at your computer, get yourself a cup of coffee, write. Just write. 2 hours, 3 hours, whatever you have available, just write. If you have 45 minutes, write. If you're, outside and you're, taking a jog and ideas come, grab your phone, write a notepad, and put your ideas down. One of the things that kind of helped me early in the first book was I would wake up from dreams and be like, that's a great idea. And I'd put it down on a notepad and then revisit it in the morning and be like, yeah, that was kind of not great. So no matter what the situation, always have an availability to jot down ideas and concepts, but set yourself up a schedule. It doesn't have to be, like Sanderson's writing 2,000 words a day and working 6 hours a day, 8 hours a day in writing. Start yourself off small, but just write. My schedules flop around all the time with kids and doctors and appointments with people and stuff like that. So I write a couple hours a day. I try to get as much time in, and if I don't get 1,000 words in, then that's okay. But I sat down and I wrote and I made progress. So that's all we can do is just take that one step at a time each day and keep going. Even if you're at a roadblock, just write down junk and then come back and fix it. That's just keep going.
Absolutely, 100%. Could not agree more, Alex. And with that, viewers and listeners, we conclude another author interview here on the channel. I want to give a huge thank you to Alex for coming on the show
Thank you so
and
much.
telling us about, you're welcome, for his upcoming book, which I'm excited to read when it comes out next year. Now, Alex, where can people find you on social media to stay up to date with news regarding the book and the series?
Well, there's two major things I'm doing right now. So one, you can go to AP Zenk, Zenk, on Instagram, and that's where you'll find my author page. It's also on Facebook as that AP Zenk, and you can stay in contact with updates and things like that. We are working on a crowdfunder for Backer Kit, so you can search Chronicles of Ordy on Backer Kit and stay in the loop, and you can actually get some cool pre-orders, and you'll get insights into what we're doing in this process. And you'll get some incentives by joining that as well. So you can just simply sign up. You don't have to pledge anything. We're just right now in the preliminary process of gathering emails and getting interest. So the more people will get interested, the quicker it'll be to launch this. And if we hit our goals, then we'll be moving up our packages and offerings. We're going to, my goal would be having, like fully illustrated hardcover books with, signatures and artwork and all that stuff in there. So if we hit our goals, that's the kind of peak premiere. But before that, we've got paperbacks, audible books, ebooks, signatures, artworks that I've already got collected, and some other little pieces that we've got. I've got one package in there, and I think this I think would have been great in my opinion. Growing up, I'm offering people who support me at certain packages to name characters, and we could determine your character's fate in the book series. So If you pledge,
Ooh.
yeah, so if you pledge that in books, probably book 2 or 3 or another series down the road, you will have the ability to name your character, and you and I can decide the fate of that character and the manner of which they live or die. So I think that's kind of a neat little offering to people. So Backer Kit Chronicles of Ordi, just come and pledge your interest to it, and as soon as it goes live, then if you want to support it, then that would be wonderful. But the more people we get to pledge interest, the faster we can make it go live. So
Awesome. I will link all that down below in the description of this video. Thank you everyone for joining us again for another interview. And again, I want to give a huge thank you to Alex for coming on the show, and I wish him the very best with his book and his series, and I cannot wait for it to come out next year. And as always, viewers and listeners, make sure to like and subscribe and comment down below what was your favorite part of the interview. And as always, this is the Wandering Scribe and the Wandering Quill signing out, wishing you all a wonderful morning, afternoon, or evening wherever you are in the world.